G'day and welcome to the Concrete Connection Project podcast. Down performing and creating on every single street of the Adelaide CBD, raising money and awareness for mental health and mental health charities that are supporting people with struggling. I am down on Catherine Helen Spence Street, on Street 122 out of 577 for the Concrete Connection Project. And I'm here with Mr. Joe Man Murphy, good mate of mine and bandmate from the Timbers, and we're down here having a chat today. Joe, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Benno. How are you going?
Yep, good, thanks. Now, Joe, we've been in a band together for many years, clocked up a lot of kilometres touring Australia, and you're living now in the sunny coast.
That's right, yeah. I'm currently down here, kind of freezing to death.
Yeah.
Used to the beautiful warm weather up there and the sunshine. It's been a bit of a shock to the system.
But you're down here, freezing at the moment, but we did a bit of a reunion concert with the Timbers on Friday just past, on August 2nd. How was it for you?
It was amazing. I don't know about you, but it was just beautiful to be back on stage together, all doing our thing that we did for so many years. It just felt really right somehow, like both for us and the crowd who were there. I think everyone had the same kind of experience. It was roll back the years.
Definitely, yeah. I feel like, there was a lot of nostalgia involved with that gig, and I think all the boys on stage felt it, and the crowd was heaving. It was awesome.
I know, it couldn't have gone better, really. I think there's potential world domination still.
Yeah. I mean, one thing that I do see often online is, not to dwell too much on the past and always to sort of look forward. But, I found that quite contradictory the other night. I thought it was great to, reminisce on some old memories and definitely, enjoy that time.
Yeah, I think there's it's well worth remaining connected to the past for sure. I think dwelling on it's a different thing, but being in touch with the good side of things that you've experienced over the years it's really important.
Yeah, no, I had a great time. Now, before you were Joe Man Murphy, you were Joe Boy Murphy. Now, can you tell us a bit, because I think you had quite an interesting upbringing, and I probably don't know all the facts, but you're an Irishman that grew up in the UK predominantly.
Yeah. So I was born in the UK, right down the south coast, down County Devon, and my dad was Irish, so we lived there in Devon till I was about 11 years old. A lot of the time on the road, moving around to all sorts of different places. And then moved to Ireland, to just south of Dublin. And was there till I came to Australia when I was 21.
And now you were homeschooled, is that right?
Yep, never been a day in school until I became a school teacher.
Yeah, I find that, quite not funny, hilarious funny, but quite interesting that a boy growing up homeschooled, travelling around the UK, then becomes a music teacher in a school. It's great.
It was a very strange first day. My first day in school with my sandwiches, sitting with the kids, was at 37 years old. What am I talking about? Older than that. 45, more like it.
Yeah. So, how was it growing up homeschooled? I would find, because I am getting somewhere with this, because I find you quite a good communicator, and we are going to talk about mental health soon, but one of the things you're quite good at is, reaching out as a mate and talking with your mates, which is, probably part of the stigma that is still connected with mental health. But coming from homeschooling, did you find yourself a bit isolated growing up?
Absolutely, yeah. I think homeschooling, the way certainly my folks did it, was very, very cool when you were kind of young, but when you reach those years where you needed to, branch out and have a lot of experiences with, making friends and dealing with conflict, dealing with young love, all that kind of stuff, you missed all of that section of your life. So The communication side of things, I think, was no real different when I was young. I think I was the one out of the family that was always reaching out to other people. For me, it was naturally something that I just needed. And I think it's just born that way. I think some things are just very natural.
And then so growing up, homeschooling, caravanning around the UK countryside, and then onto Ireland, and then you found yourself in Australia at around 21, was it?
That's right. Yeah, I was 21 when I first came here with my sister, and very, very quickly got married, and before I know it, I was a father at 24, without a lot of life experience at all behind me. So it was a crazy ride.
Yep. And then you're a resident, or you're a citizen now?
I'm a citizen now. Yeah, I'm a proper Aussie now, eh?
Yeah. Well, we're glad to have you. And so as I was saying before, part of the struggle, and I can only speak from a man's perspective, men do find it quite hard to talk about mental health and things like that. But you have been someone, particularly in my life, that would reach out and say, "Oh, how are you going and how are you doing?" And I guess what I'm getting at is, why? Why is that something that you're particularly good at, as opposed to a lot of the community that isn't and still struggles with that a little bit?
I think, there's good and bad with everything. And as I said, there were tricky parts of the way I grew up. But at the same time, I grew up with, my sister, my mum, my dad. Everyone was like equal. I didn't grow up with the stigma of sports clubs where, harden up, you're a man, you don't share your feelings and all that sort of stuff. We didn't really talk about feelings. There wasn't much in the way of dealing with, arguments, conflicts. All that was much harder. But just in general, I think you see things a very different way. I think when you haven't been to school, and this is something that I did learn when I did finally become part of school, I started to see a side of the world that I'd never really seen before. And you started to learn just why those things are the way they are, the conflict between the sort of male and female in life, the way that the struggle to kind of deal with those kind of relationships. I guess I didn't grow up with any of that. So for me, I think community and friendship, because at times I didn't have that in my life, has become very important to me. And to reach out just feels kind of natural, really.
Yeah, well, it's definitely a great quality to have. I'm thankful to have it in my life. A good mate such as yourself. That's interesting because it could have gone the complete other way, for someone, being homeschooled. Well, I'm just assuming, but, it could go, you could be quite isolated, quite introverted otherwise, But it's great to see that you're not that way, because, I think, even in social settings that we've been in over the years, you're always a good chatter, to strangers that enjoyed a concert or something like that. I find, you're quite a good communicator, whereas, I did grow up in the school system and stuff, but I find I shy away from that. I'm not that great at, talking after shows and things like that. So it was always sort of, good that you were there to be able to, handle the strangers that wanted to have a chat about the gig and stuff.
Yeah, I think it does say a lot about there are certain things that just come when you're born, and you can't necessarily change those side of things. And maybe there's also, we grew up in a very close unit where if you all live in a one-bedroom flat when you're growing up with, a family of 4, you get to be very used to just sort of being able to put up with something, even if it's driving you insane. So maybe I'd be inclined to maybe give some people some time when, even though I really didn't feel like it. But you just do it to keep harmony, I guess.
Yeah.
Just something that, isn't always a good thing either.
So, you're obviously a very accomplished musician and actually an incredible painter and illustrator as well. And we did have your lovely wife on episode 2 of the podcast. A lot of the podcasts I've been doing just through the industry that I've been in has been with creative people and things like that. So I think we've gone over that quite a bit in the podcast about the benefits of being creative and being able to create something, whether it be just for a hobby or following a passion professionally. So I want to try and steer clear about that, because the benefits have, become quite clear about journaling or writing songs or doing paintings, of how good it can be. But not everyone is as creative as the next person. So I want to talk a bit about particularly your newfound surfing career. So 47 now, is that correct? Are you 47?
Yes.
Yep.
No. 48.
48. So, and you picked up surfing probably, 2 or 3 years ago?
About 2.5 years ago now.
Mm-hmm. And then, so, tell us a bit about that, how that came about, and then how it's sort of benefiting you now, picking up a new hobby later in life. And we've talked about it also before, something that you do that you're not trying to monetize. I feel you and I are always sort of trying to figure out, how we can monetize these passions and hobbies. But I feel like surfing for you isn't quite that. I feel like it's something a bit more for yourself.
Yeah, it's something. It's something I've always watched people do and thought I'd love to have done it. It was never really easy here in Adelaide because of just waves in general. But up on the Sunshine Coast, every time you go to the beach, it's in your face. Everyone's out there surfing, and I just decided to give it a go. I was at a really low point in life with music, performing, just everything in general. I needed a way to just give myself, I guess, some physical activity. I think physical activity has always been very, very important to me. I've got a certain energy in my body that I need to get out. Otherwise, I'm just not in a good physical or mental state. Mm-hmm. And, I guess it's easier to look back now and think that all these things were, that's exactly why I did it. I maybe didn't see it as clearly back then. But what I have discovered from it is that it's an escape from everything. Because I used to actually play soccer for years. And when you're running around a soccer field and people are trying to tackle you and everything, there is no possibility your brain can be thinking, I don't know if I'm good enough with this, or my music career is not going on. The general things your brain thinks about. And it's the same with surfing. When you're getting smashed by waves and just trying to, at times, survive when you're a beginner, it gives you that period of time away from mobile phones, away from careers and everything else, where you're just separated. You're in a beautiful setting, in nature. Community's amazing. For a while there, I surfed on my own when I learned, which was really, really hard, to motivate yourself every day to go out, deal with a lot of fear. But once the community came in then as well, it's just such a healthy thing. Community is such an important thing. And that's what I have got a lot of that out of it. It's like we were talking about a minute ago with Friday night. As a solo musician, I got to the point of having, real bad panic attacks, just a lot of nerves. I have never once felt that with the three of you next to me on stage, because there's that feeling of just community. You're a part of something together, and it's just such an important thing.
Yeah, I guess you're totally right, because I think you've told me a few times you've been in some quite stressful situations out in the water.
Yeah. And
you're not thinking about, the next song or the next gig when you're, waving to be saved.
No, it's not that important, the next gig, when you might never make it. Yeah, it is. And I think learning a new thing is very good for you as well at any stage in your life. And just being able to, because you have to control your mind, because the fear is there. And it started me on the kind of mental health journey I guess I've been on for the last 2 years as well. Came through that. Which through going and talking to professionals and everything else, and just helps you get I was only thinking about it the other day. You've been a tradie for many years as well, and I'm sure your 50-meter power cord is not exactly straight. And I think after all the years of everything that's happened in your life, my brain felt like that. And it felt like it just needed to be untangled. And
laid out in the sun.
Pretty much, yeah. And it's amazing how, even coming to Adelaide this time and driving around, you're appreciating this, you're appreciating that. When it was completely tangled up, you weren't seeing any of that.
Oh, yeah, well, I can completely relate to that. As some of the viewers may know, I just spent a few weeks in Tasmania, or knocking around all where I grew up. And, when you're growing up from, as a teenager, you don't realise that you're potentially walking around in one of the most beautiful spots on the planet. Now, I walk there and I'm like, oh my God, I did not appreciate any of this growing up. It's one of those things that, and I reckon a lot of Adelaide people growing up, have that textbook year in Melbourne, always looking to get out. But I think Adelaide's, I think it's actually been named one of the most beautiful cities in the world now. And, Hobart, and where I grew up in Kingston and Blackmans Bay, is just, I can definitely appreciate it a lot more now. And, than it is when you have released a bit of that tangle, I guess.
Yeah, and this is the problem with the whole mental health thing, isn't it? And that's why I've huge admiration for what you're doing with this, because it's extremely important, because unfortunately mental health only seems to be a thing when it goes wrong. Like no one ever even remotely looks at it until you realize that you're struggling. And the more, if you never service a car, it's a big problem.
Yeah, well, it was, and exactly like how Jamie from Lighthouse put it, who I interviewed the other day. He said, if you cut your hand open and need 4 stitches, straight away you'll go and to the ER, or you'll go get stitches. But, if you're struggling, generally it gets to a tipping point or boiling point where it's a real problem. That's why, people don't really talk about it, or go get their car serviced, or go for a tune-up. And, there's been plenty of analogies along the way of, you can weed your garden once, but in 2 weeks the weeds are back. So, it's a continuous thing, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think certainly when it comes to sort of getting help with it all, that I certainly spoke to, I think it was 3 different people that by the time I finished the session, I didn't really feel any connection or anything. I think, and then I spoke to another one, and straight away I spent the next 3 hours afterwards just thinking about all sorts of, I was left without any answers to some things I was asked. And I think that's exactly what you need. If they don't leave you without being able to answer something where you need to think about it, that's the therapist you need. Because, it was like I just hadn't thought about these things in this way until I was asked. And then he really just opened up so many different avenues that I hadn't thought about in years and maybe needed to.
Yeah, well, times that I've definitely spoken with people, sometimes they can ask the question and they're not going to give you the answer, but it gives you the opportunity to make your own cases and think it out, sometimes writing it out and sometimes talking it out. And sometimes you don't know what you're talking about, but as you're talking, it helps you navigate maybe the way that you should be going, sort of making your own case in a way.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. I think, Yeah, taking yourself sometimes, they talk about writing letters to yourself as a child and all that sort of stuff. And when I did that, I started to see myself as a very different person than I actually had thought I was, and battered myself over the years for being that person, I always considered myself a bit of a coward, I think, my entire life, because I was always one of those kids, those kids who run down a hill and just dive into a lake and just have no fear. Yeah, I was never one of them. So you're kind of, because in your own head you always felt a bit fearsome, I think. And then I realised I'd kind of, been jumping out of planes and bungee jumping and taking wild chances at things, maybe just to try to prove to myself that I wasn't that person.
Well, and so just going back a bit, so one of the sort of techniques was to write a letter to your child self. Is that
to various parts of your life? Yeah, to your teenage self, and maybe it gives you an opportunity to forgive yourself for things that you'd been blaming yourself for years, where at the end of the day you dealt with the situation with the best knowledge that you had at the time. I mean, it's easy to look back now, but at the time, you did the best you could, and just to put some of those things to bed certainly has made a huge difference for me.
Wow, yeah, well that's a great one. I've always heard about writing letters and not necessarily sending them, but again, it's just a help of journaling and making your case for things, whether you know which way to go or not. But yeah, that's I might try that. There's definitely a few things I could address from my early years in life, for sure. And
I'd found it sort of, I'd be writing for maybe an hour, and then you'd just have these kind of penny drop moments when you'd kind of realise that things are just not the way you thought they were all these years. And yeah, I think sort of late teens is another very important one, because we're all fairly messed up at that time.
Yes, yeah, well, yeah, as you said, trying to navigate the world the best way you know how. Yeah, and for me, I kind of did that while also having a young kid as well, which, I've just spent an amazing time with my son here now, with whereas that relationship was hard, as you know, for a long time. But again, just being older, a bit wiser, and and seeing, the next generation then go through that period where they're totally confused and messed up, and you see them come the other end. Yeah, well, I think, your son Aiden is definitely at the other end. He's turning into quite the fine young man.
Yeah, absolutely, he is, yeah. Yeah, he's more responsible than his old man.
Yeah, thankfully. Oh, well, so, I think we've sort of got a good grasp on it anyway, but everyone I've been asking, everyone so far on the podcast, and I think we've probably covered it anyway, but the words mental health, what's the first thing that springs to mind when someone says the words mental health?
Yeah, I thought about this a little bit, because I've listened to, the episodes that you've done, and it's not easy to come up with a definitive kind of short answer, but I think to me, it's probably the hardest road we all go down to a certain extent, because I guess it's better recently, but up until recently, there's no help, there's no advice, you're just expected to just deal with it. And we all, as you said earlier about the cutting your hand or whatever, if it's a physical issue, we've got 1,000,001 ways to deal with it. But nothing physically works either unless your mental health is in a good state. And it's all new for me as well, but it is. I think it's something that we have to keep on top of at all times, really, just checking in regularly. So yeah, I think to me it's just it's a new thing, and it's a hard road, but it's a very rewarding one too.
Yeah, that's something I haven't heard. The mental health journey can be a rewarding one. There's that stigma that it's always doom and gloom and it's always bad, but because mental health doesn't mean a bad thing. You know, if you're mentally healthy, that's incredible.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it has always been a bad thing, hasn't it? I mean, in past times. And I think, like everything in life at the moment, the social media side of things, where there's like, do this for your mental health and you'll be happy for the rest of your life. That is setting everyone up for failure, because the reality of mental health is there's going to be good days and there's going to be bad days, and you'll never change that. It's just how you kind of have the, as you've said before, the tools to kind of deal with that. But unfortunately, we're all met every day with this perfect solution to everything that's fed to us online, and then the world puts these people like your, I don't know, Taylor Swift or whatever, as an example of someone who's just living this perfect life, but they're no different.
No, I think
possibly worse.
I think as an incredible artist as she is, I think she's definitely been met with some tough times. It's particularly media and things like that as well. One thing I did want to ask you, actually, because going back into the school system, and then from not being there growing up, but for me, every time someone was seen at the school counsellor or something like that going through school, it was like, oh, well, something's wrong with them, what's going on with them, oh, something's not right at home. There was that that branding attached, or anyone going to seek help, oh, that's a bad thing. And obviously it has changed a bit now, but in schools, the subject that's been there the whole time is PE, physical education. And I know now a little bit in the schools with my children there, and and checking out high schools now, there is places where kids can go, I don't really know what they call it, but sort of like a little retreat, an area where there are maybe counsellors and support workers there, but I don't think I've ever seen a subject like ME, mental education or anything like that. Is there anything floating around the schools in terms of support like that these days?
Well, I worked in 4, 3 none of anything whatsoever, including just a level of education that you'd swear it was 1983. Like, it's just shocking, really. There's a bit of kind of meditation being brought in, especially in the younger years, just getting kids to just sit and be quiet with their thoughts, etc. But it's kind of dealt with an iron fist. If there's anything wrong, you're at the school counsellor and you get told off. I don't think anything's really, from what I could see, has changed. And the biggest indicator to me with that is, as a instrumental music teacher in the school, I was the counsellor. Straight away you could see it, because I was the only one-on-one time that any of those kids was going to have. And I started to struggle with it a bit, because it's quite a burden, some of the stuff you get spoken to by kids, from whether it's bullying or all sorts of things they'd tell you, where really you wonder whether there should be some one-on-one sessions going on for every pupil, even if it's once a month. And there just isn't. I don't want to go into too much details about schools and things that, we're dealing with things in a really bad way, but there needs to be more. Because those kids need support, and, the amount of times, because I used to mentor like the rock bands and things, and you'd spend so much time building these kids' confidence and explaining to them that, if this goes pear-shaped and you're left on stage and you sing really badly and whatever, that it doesn't matter. And giving them that message and that confidence to get them through was great. But at the same time, you think to yourself, why is that me at the school? Because if it's not me, it's no one else.
Yeah, that's interesting. And that's not to say, we're not out here saying all schools are bad and they're not teaching this stuff, because I definitely don't know everything that's going on within the walls of all schools. But I just know, because we're in the sort of period in our lives, we're shopping for high schools, and we've done, numerous high school tours, and we went to one and it was like, oh, well, here's our area if a student is struggling or need, a pathways program or something like that. This is where they like to come, but, we're going to try to get them out of there as quick as possible and back to class. And I'm like, oh, well, if someone's struggling or needs, the pathways, this should be an open door. And if, because, sitting in a classroom isn't always the right match for the right child either. Like there's so many different ways that a child can learn, and sitting with as you said, with an iron fist in a classroom, writing lines is not always the best way for each child.
No, and I would say, in fairness to schools, the majority of the problems are probably from home, and that's very tricky for them to deal with. But misbehaviour needs to be dealt with the question of why, not punishment. It needs to be looked into. Why is this happening? Because I saw plenty of kids get expelled who were just doing the same behaviour, which was met with the same punishment. And if you try the same thing every time, you get the same result every time. And there's no flexibility.
Yeah, it's tricky. Yeah, I mean, obviously we can't, speak on every school or anything like that, or the systems that are in place, because I don't really know them.
And it's very hard. It's very hard from a school's point of view, because they're restricted by what they're allowed to do. Well, they have to teach every kid the same way, and it just doesn't work. Yeah,
well, that's how. I mean, obviously, there are different pathways now. Because definitely trade pathways as well, not academic pathways, because people are better with their hands than their maths or things like that. So there's definitely something there. But
yeah, I think there's some countries in Europe that are exploring a lot of different ways of teaching, and their results are just through the roof compared to what we're seeing in countries here. I don't know why they don't get looked at, what they're doing. It doesn't fit the current system, I guess. But you've got to surely be looking at where the results are the best. And they're teaching on a more individual basis. Because, I could regularly see kids who, they were given 2 to 3 hours of homework a night by the time they were in sort of year 9. And then, 2 games of rugby on the weekend, swimming, soccer. Like these kids are fried.
Yeah,
I couldn't do it.
I mean, my son's in grade 5, and his week's pretty much jammed, and then to squeeze in homework as well and things like that, and they get a fair bit in grade 5 too. But I guess one of the struggles we have is like you got to have that time to let kids be kids as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
And where majority of the learning is being done, in the playground as well, as you said, with conflict resolution and things like that, and sharing and just playing together, exploring, climbing trees, breaking an arm, those things need to happen, and that's where you get that, resilience through failure as well.
Yeah, and that's the thing I was saying with the rock bands, these kids that learn to be a part of a group, to have somebody there putting them in a confronting situation and seeing the success and the joy they get out of that. It's such an important learning tool for them. I actually, funny enough, had this thought after looking into my own mental health thing, where it's amazing how hard and brutal you can be on yourself, and yet the next day you go into school and you help somebody out and you help them all this experience. You're like, why don't I do that to myself?
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's. I don't think there's an easy solution for any side with schooling at the moment, especially with devices as well.
yeah, it gets a bit tricky too. Well, let's move on. What's next for Joe Man Murphy? Obviously, flying back today, back to the sunny coast.
Yes, flying back to the sunny coast. And I got a week on holidays, and then back to the new business and fixing up houses. And musically, I haven't got a huge amount coming up. I'm not really focusing too hard on music at the moment. Currently building a studio.
Yeah.
That's going to be the new thing, just doing some recording at home and, just letting that go where it goes, really.
Yep. Too easy. Well, great to have you on the podcast, mate.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Say good day to your wife for me when you get back.
I will do, and I hope this all continues on the road it's going. It's amazing what you're doing.
Oh, thank you. Oh, that was a great chat, mate. And I think you need to warm up a bit. We might go grab a coffee, I reckon.
That sounds like an excellent idea, yeah. Well, and that's the end of that.
Good timing. All right. Thanks, mate.
Thanks, buddy.